So thank you again, Adrian, for the opportunity to be here. Look, I'd just like to begin firstly by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from where I am joining you today. I am here in Sydney, so it is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their clans, to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea and community. I'd also like to acknowledge the individual and collective expertise of all of those of us who live with the reality of mental ill health and exposure to suicide. In the Commission, we recognise that it is for that reason that we do the work we do, working with all of us who are impacted by mental ill health and suicide. Look, normally I finish with those two acknowledgements, but today I would just like to pause and do a further acknowledgement to all of those who are under threat in Ukraine. It is something that is having a very significant impact on all of us as we watch the reality of that tragedy unfold. So I do acknowledge the pain, I acknowledge the fear, and I acknowledge the need for all of us to come behind those who are so impacted. So if I could have the next slide, please. And let's just stop and look today, and let me just set some opening comments here. And I welcome the comments of Minister Fletcher in terms of the intersect between mental health and the arts, the creative arts. Before I go into my actual kind of presentation, though, I just would like to look, or to, I guess, draw attention to the fact I think we're looking at three elements here when you go into this workshop of the intersect between your sector and mental health and wellbeing. Firstly and foremost, because you are critical to us, we must address the needs specifically of your industry and your sector. How has the pandemic impacted on you? You join us in our general humanity of all Australians, and we have all been impacted by this pandemic. But we have also learned through the pandemic that there are significant and quite specific impacts on various industries and sectors. You are the voice for that. We need to make sure that those of us who are working in this area of mental health and wellbeing truly understand what it is that you need to support yourselves. So please be a voice for that. Secondly, and I said this last time and I'll unpack this a little bit more, but I firmly believe that not only what you do, as the Minister has acknowledged, is important, and let's make that the second, what you do, that end product, is of significant benefit to so many people. So let's never lose sight of that. But thirdly, and really significantly, I also believe it is the way you do things, the very essence of your creativity, which helps us unlock at an individual level how we can express those things impacting on our mental health and wellbeing. Because the reality of mental health is that it's not like a broken arm with physical health. You can't actually see it in many people. It is our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. Many people do not actually have the mechanism to put that into a language, to communicate it to people. We have so many lessons we can learn from your sector as to how every individual can unlock their creativity, their ability to communicate their needs. So please, as I put this in a context, can I just say that those are three areas where points of intersect that I think are really important as you go into the workshop. Thank you, in fact, for inviting me back. It was fantastic to actually participate with you at the November Arts, Creativity and Wellbeing Summit. As I said to Adrian before, thank you that you've invited me back. You really are a fantastic audience of industry professionals and artists, and you do truly make a positive contribution to our life. The central theme of my presentation, just to recap, back in November, was talking about contributing lives and how our driving focus on how we can ensure that all people in Australia, irrespective of their location, their financial situation, their education or their access to services, are supported to live what we call a contributing life. So as we come to this intersect between your sector and mental health and wellbeing, I want to just recap on the importance of a contributing life, because I think unlocking that word contributing is a key intersect with your sector. So what does a contributing life mean from the perspective of the Commission, and in particular our focus on mental health and wellbeing? It's about having a safe place to live and about having access to meaningful activity. Now that of course can be work, education or otherwise. It's about having positive friendships and relationships, about having access to healthcare and services, and in fact, the freedom to choose to live the life that we choose to, regardless of our mental health challenges. So it's deeply embedding into the fact that we all have mental health, like we all have physical health. That should not prevent us from living a life where we truly can make a contribution. In that sense, it's about providing real choice and real hope to people, and it's about reframing expectations so that people are not just being supported to survive, but in fact thrive. From a mental health and suicide prevention system reform perspective, it's also about ensuring that all Australians have equal access to mental health treatment, care and support. I said it in November, I'm going to repeat it because it is so important to us. In so many ways, the creative arts are a critical contribution to the supports we can provide to people within this concept of a contributing life. The art and creative fields have a central role in helping to do what I call healing and feeding our souls. You provide ways to socially connect as individuals, as communities, and as a society. And as I've just said before in my opening comments, your creativity actually broadens the connection touch points with people. There's absolutely no doubt that the pandemic has had a significant impact on your community. And as I've said, please voice to us what those needs are. But as we are now as a nation moving towards a time of living with COVID and a time of recovery, then we also need to be able to understand how we can work with your sector to ensure that you have a pivotal role in helping us heal as a nation. Now, the end result of that is people enjoying your product, but it goes so much deeper than that. And that is where we need to learn from a mental health and wellbeing sector as to how do we interact with you. You're actually going to be the ones who can help us see and appreciate what we've been through. You can show us through your forms of creativity, your various forms of expression, just how it's changed us. And we need to see that. We need to understand it. And you will also help us, I believe, identify not only the obstacles we now face, but also the opportunities that lie ahead. Creativity can have a real spirit of optimism. That is what we're going to need. We have been changed as individuals. I suspect we've also been changed as a society. And that is where we need your creativity to help us. So I think in a final point on that, I would also just like to touch on the fact that, and this is an accepted in mental health and wellbeing now, creative therapy is a form of therapy. It is a vital part, therefore, of our system as we go towards recovery. So what I want to now thought I might do for you from our mental health and wellbeing sector perspective, if you like, is, and perhaps this is the most useful way that I can lead in for the work that you're going to be doing through this process that will land in May with some policy initiatives, is just give you a bit of a snapshot as to what is actually happening within the mental health and wellbeing reform agenda. It's an agenda which is up and going in Australia at the moment. So perhaps if I contextualise it, you can then best see how you may be able to fit into it. And Adrian, you made, I think, a really important opening comment with respect to that. And that is about the fact that we are looking now at a concept of whole of government. So you made that point, and I think that it's a very well recognised point. It is something which has been around for a while, and it is increasingly becoming the lexicon at a government level of what we do. It's actually very, very, very difficult to put that into effect. And there have been some further refinements of it that we've seen emerge over the pandemic. So if I could have the next slide, please, and I'll start to look at how we can actually define it. I think whole of government, we need to recognise, and before I go into this slide in detail, we need to recognise that in Australia we live in a federated system of government. So we actually have a very complex system. And if we truly want to be able to implement a whole of government approach, unfortunately it does need a deep understanding of how that system is working or not working, so we can actually understand where the complications are. But I'm going to take a leaf out of a book that I hope you can lead us in, which is about optimism, and say, yes, we can see many complications in trying to put together a whole of government approach. I actually think the flip side of complication is actually an opportunity. So let's look at what the opportunities are. So going into whole of government. So whole of government has actually been around as a phrase for probably 20 odd years. It's basically means how do we take the diversity of all of our different ministries, our public administrations, our public agencies, if you like, across, say, for instance, the federal government, and say, how can those portfolios best work together? I'll come in later, Adrian, and pick up on your point of the social determinants, but it kind of fits in that place. But it's really saying, how can you actually not just look, say, for instance, at the health portfolio, but all portfolios of government, and how if you make those portfolios work best together, you can actually provide a solution to a problem or an issue, and how do you leverage greater economic efficiencies and effectiveness. So that's the theory of it. I think one really practical example of where it probably worked was when we came together to put on the 2000 Sydney Olympics. That actually involved many different portfolios all coming together and working. We got it right on that one. It's unfortunate that sometimes we don't get it right on other very significant social issues. But look, what I want to take you through, and I think this is really important, it's a nuance around whole of government, but I think it is relevant as you go into what do we do about policy development. And it goes to that point I talked about of we are in a federated system in Australia and a Westminster system. The federated system means that we have 9 jurisdictions in Australia. We've got states and territories, which have certain responsibilities, and certainly in mental health, the states and territories are responsible for what we call our tertiary care, our hospital care, and what happens when you are at that end. The Commonwealth Government in our federated system has responsibility for what we call the entrance points, primary care, GPs, etc. And then we have to somehow work out how we work together. That sits across education, it sits across all sorts of different portfolios, not just health. And it makes it very complicated because, of course, each government has their own agendas that they're running with. So what has emerged out of the pandemic, and I take some real heart out of this, and in fact I heard it coming, and I don't think you'd mind me saying this, first from our Prime Minister's mouth himself, where we were talking about a whole of government approach around suicide prevention. And he said to me, Chris, he said, actually I think what you're talking about is a whole of governments. And I stopped and thought he's absolutely right. Whole of government has been traditionally seen, how can we get all the different portfolios of, say, Commonwealth government working together? How do we get Paul Fletcher as kind of Minister for the Arts, etc., working with Greg Hunter-Cross in health, etc.? How do we make that work? Whole of governments, and the Prime Minister did pick up on this, and all First Ministers did, actually came out of the establishment of National Cabinet. So National Cabinet back in May 2020 was where we all came together and where the first ministers of each jurisdiction said, there are some things which we need to do at a national level. Now, in suicide prevention, we've taken that up as being what are those things that either for the need for consistency, for scale, or for reach, need to be done at a national level. So when you're looking at this from the perspective of policy, what are those things which need national consistency? But a really good concept of whole of governments is that you can also then take it down to local applications. And I'll take you through something we actually did with a whole of governments approach, just to give you a bit of an example. But it is really the importance of that concept of saying we're not just going to take diverse agencies and portfolios across one level of governments. We're going to actually reach across our jurisdictional fence. And the Commonwealth is going to work with New South Wales. It's going to work with Victoria. It's going to work with Tasmania. It's going to work in a different way. Now, why is this important? It's important to try and actually leverage, of course, the machinery of government. But I think if we can really take ourselves into that spot, it also changes the way we really think and we approach how we deal with complex problems. Now, when it comes to the 3 things that I've kind of called out to yourselves to be doing over these few days, which is to articulate for us what your needs are, to recognise the unique offering you have for Australia's mental health and wellbeing for individuals, and to help us unlock our own potential, to unlock our own creativity. We need to change our way of thinking so it is very nuanced. And I think this whole of government's approach is how we can best do that. It actually takes shifting our thinking. So, and not only shifting our thinking, but also then being disciplined to actually, if you like, cede our place a bit, bring others in, and find a collective response. So one of the ways, if I can perhaps best kind of exemplify how this has actually worked for us in the last 18 months, 2 years, we've still got a long way to go. And it sits very firmly within our response to the pandemic. So if I can have the next slide, please. We actually brought together our National Mental Health and Wellbeing Pandemic Response Plan. Now, this actually came about as a specific request from National Cabinet back in April 2020. So National Cabinet had formed in March 2020. All governments were recognising there is going to be a mental health impact of not only the pandemic itself, but how we're managing the pandemic. And there was a request that came through to say, can we actually develop a national plan around mental health and wellbeing to deal with COVID? Now, this goes within a context where national plans to deal with national disasters are the raison d'etre. They exist. And so there is a health plan of how to respond to COVID. This was actually a recognition in that plan. We didn't actually have a specific mental health plan. So at the, I guess under that opportunity to do it, and we were given a very quick turnaround time, we got together, the Commission worked very closely with our colleagues in New South Wales and Victoria at a government level, and we brought in all of the jurisdictions. And believe this or not, within 10 days, we actually came together as 9 jurisdictions. Just stop and think about that, with all of the different challenges of that. And we brought together a National Mental Health and Wellbeing Pandemic Response Plan, which actually recognised that people's lives were going to be directly and indirectly impacted by the pandemic. That it recognised the need for us to look at priority populations. It recognised the need to look at key points of distress. And all 9 jurisdictions came together, got behind their first ministers, and in May 2020, it was approved by National Cabinet. It then also got followed through with some funding, some budget realities actually came out of it. We looked at what was some key priority areas, so we identified, and now's not the time to go through it, but it is something separately we could do at some stage, but we identified, if you like, 10 priority areas where we said there needs to be an agreement between all of us that this is, if you like, the playing field. These 10 priority areas are where we need to focus attention. So one of them, for instance, was how do we do more innovative, integrated mental health services? How do we actually do a more assertive outreach approach so we go to where people live, learn and work? We all agreed on those 10 priority areas. We also then agreed as 9 jurisdictions that there were 3 key things that all of us wanted to pop right up to the top. Again, this might be an approach that you could look at. For us, those 3 things were sharing data. That was incredibly important. That point of what I've just said, that we needed to shift from being a mental health system that was there for people to come to take a more assertive outreach. We need to be where people live, learn and work. And we needed to be much more integrated as 3. Now, that led to, as I say, some funding initiatives. It has led to opportunities for further conversation. We have, over the last 18 months, been able to identify national mental health issues that are emerging. And the beauty of this kind of approach, where it is a true whole of governments, is you can have national consistency where you need it for scale, for reach, for consistency purposes, but you allow flexibility at the local level for the actual solutions to be applied. It is an approach that all governments find easier to take on board. Out of interest, Australia happened to be the first of the countries in the world to come up with a mental health pandemic response plan. And literally the day that Cabinet endorsed it, WHO, the World Health Organization, said, hey guys, it would be a really good thing if countries had a mental health recovery plan to the pandemic. So that was a positive that we had. But as I say, we've actually got the proof in the pudding that it is possible for governments and ourselves to come together and work together. If I can have the next slide, and I'm just noticing the time, so I'll scoot through this. The next thing that is really important, and this is where we come in with our social determinants, Adrian, is at the landing point. So we've, pause. There's one bit I need to do here. We had the pandemic response plan. Before I get to Vision 2030, there has been another very significant development that has just emerged at the back end of last year. Under our mental health and suicide prevention reform agenda, all governments, again at national cabinet level, said we actually need a national mental health and suicide prevention agreement. So the pandemic response plan was just that. It was a response to the pandemic. In that more substantive reform agenda space, we have actually had national cabinet, after a year of negotiating, coming up with a national mental health and suicide prevention plan. It was in principle agreed to by National Cabinet on the 10th of December last year and is now with First Ministers to have their individual governments formally endorse it. It talks about how we can have a more consistent approach across all governments, how we can work better together. So then just quickly finishing in on Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is what does it look like if we actually get it right. So if we go down this reform agenda path, if we work better together, if we have a more assertive outreach space, what does it actually look like when we land in the right space? And look, if I had to sum this up, it would be talking about the fact that any Australian who has mental health needs can access the treatment and support that they need, when they need it, where they need it, in an affordable, accessible way. But it also talks about us having a very proactive approach to prevention and early intervention. And I think here again we can see intersects with the benefits that can be provided by the outcomes of your sectors. It means that we fully embrace the concept of people living in a way that enables a contributing life. And in order to do that, we actually come to a point where we quickly recognise that not only, as I've talked about, a whole of government's approach is important, but in fact it's critical. Because if you talk about somebody having a contributing life, being supported in all aspects to be as mentally healthy and well as they can be, then actually you do need to address those social determinants. And they're as important as the biological and psychiatric elements of mental health. They include the societal components, culture, media, political structure. How is our society intersecting with us? The environmental factors, where we live. Do we live in natural environments, built-up environments? What's the impact of that on our ability to live a contributing life that is focusing in on enabling us, irrespective of our mental health and irrespective of mental ill health? We need to look at our socio-economic, let's face it, how wealthy are we or not? What are our housing circumstances? What's our migrant status? In Australia, unfortunately for too many, it's about food security. And then we also need to look at the health and biological factors such as trauma, hereditary, nutrition. So it is a complex environment in which we're working. There is a broadening understanding that mental health and wellbeing can't just sit in mental health or in health portfolios. It needs to work across different portfolios of government. It's coming at a time when our understanding of whole of government is more sophisticated, it's more nuanced, it's going into whole of governments. It's also coming at a time when we have demonstrated we can do it, and that's critically important. So if I can just have the last slide, and I'll just finish on this. As we come through to that, can I again reiterate just the importance of the contribution that you do need to make? We've learned here at the Commission that the only way to effectively discharge our responsibility to not only monitor and report what's happening in mental health and to provide policy advice to government, but to do that thing we're called to do, which is to be a catalyst for change. The only effective way we can do it is if it's resonating with what Australians need. And the reality is the only way we can resonate with what Australians need is if we are working with Australians, if they are contributing, if we are ceding the central point to their voices. Your voice, as I said before, is absolutely critical to it. I reiterate again because it is deep within me that this is so important. that you have a vital role to help us better understand how we can help every Australian find their language, their expression of what they are feeling and experiencing. We need the acuity of your lens on what has happened to us as individuals, as a society, and as a nation. We need your ability to provide a place for us to have a sense of optimism, hope, expression. That is the product of what you do. This journey of mental health and wellbeing, this journey of a whole of government's approach, actually needs each and every one of us, and yours is a vital role to play. So as you look to what it is that you are asking for, please see not only what we need to do for you, and we acknowledge that critical role of what you have to offer us. Because if we truly want to not only heal from the pandemic, but actually unlock our potential as a nation, we must have your voice there, and we must have your expertise as to how we unlock individual potential and creativity. So I wish you a very great time working this through, and I thank you again for the opportunity of participating. Thank you.